I thought I was hallucinating. I could hear this clanging. And what had happened was one of the polar bears had smelt the food and had gone to one of the tents and ripped a hole and was sort of poking its head into the hole of the tent.
Nabs Al Busaidi is a London-born Omani. In 2009, he became the first Arab to walk from the coast of Antarctica to the magnetic North Pole. It took over 8 weeks of traveling 20 kilometers a day in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, a vast desert-like environment. The North Pole has no time zone. The sun rises and sets just once a year, and those who dare venture here walk on sheets of ice floating on the Arctic Ocean. As far as we know from historical records, only 359 people have ever completed this challenge. I'm Nadia Michel, and this is TMR Thrill Seekers.
There was one night we were camped together. So when I say together, there was, I think, 2 or 3 teams, and we decided that we were sort of close together. So we all camped, within 10 meters of each other. And every night we would do our safety call at 8 p.m. So everyone would set up the tent around 6 and set up their food and cook and eat and then call in their GPS position, then go to sleep. I would stay up, and I'd have to stay up until like midnight so I could make my phone call to Oman to do my radio interview every day with the radio station. It's getting really late. I think I must be the only one awake, and I hear clanging. So one of the ways to get rid of a polar bear, if a polar bear comes, is to bang metal pots together and scare them away. Because sound actually disturbs them quite a lot, because it's a very, there's no unnatural noises in the North Pole. So if you make a weird noise, it scares the polar bears. They're only used to wind or ice breaking. They never really hear anything different. So clanging pans together is one way to scare them. The people in the tent were banging their saucepans to try and scare it away. And I realized what was happening. And I knew one of the things we do is we have shotguns. And with the shotgun, you get 2 types of shells. One is a slug, which is a big, heavy bullet. And the other is a bear banger or a flashbang, which consists of it's a shotgun shell that fires about 100, 200 meters. And it makes a big firework and a big bang. So the idea is you fire it above the polar bear's head or in the direction of the polar bear, and the polar bear runs away. I'm in my sleeping bag with the shotgun, and I'm awake, and I hear that, and I think, oh my God, there's a polar bear. I need to jump out and use the bear bang and scare it away. But the only thing is, when you're in the pole, most of the time you have to sleep inside your sleeping bag naked, so that any sweat is wicked away by the fleece lining, so you don't have the ice freeze on you. So I was sleeping in my sleeping bag naked. I heard the polar bear, I heard the banging, and I just about to jump out. And I thought, you know what? If I jump out and that polar bear doesn't get scared and I'm eaten, I'm going to be found naked with just a pair of boots on and a shotgun in my hand. I think I'm just going to lie in bed and just hope it walks away.
In the end, the noise scared the bear away, and Nabs was spared the embarrassment of being found dead and naked in the snow. But how Nabs ended up in that tent in the first place goes back to what he calls a lightning strike moment, a chance meeting with someone he'd met on the adventure circuit.
It was a bit of a lightning bolt moment, because I was sitting at lunch in a restaurant and there was a guy nearby who I knew from the Roadrunners, so a cross-country running club. And he was talking about climbing Everest, and he was seriously talking about it. And he said, he'd been the year before and he wanted to go back and attempt the summit, and would I be interested in going with him because he's looking for a partner? And immediately I dismissed it. I said, yeah, no, I'm just here for lunch, thanks. I might take dessert. I'm not going to Everest, And the switch is this. I asked my friend about climbing Everest. And he said, yeah, you could climb Everest, but 4,000 people have done Everest. Only 400 people have ever walked to a pole. And if you go to the North Pole, you'll be the first Arab to walk to a pole. If you climb Everest, you'll be one of 4,000, and you won't be the first Arab. You'll be one of many that have already done it. It's sort of mentally, I wasn't totally convinced, but the thing that he said was, if you have a record, you're the fastest 100 meters runner. Next year, someone will come and break your record. So right now, we know who the Usain Bolt is, the fastest 100-meter runner. But who was the fastest 100-meter runner 10 years ago? I don't know. Who was the fastest 100-meter runner 30 years ago? No idea. Couldn't even guess. So as long as you have a record like the fastest or the oldest or youngest or strongest or highest or lowest, if you have any one of those records, somebody will come and break your record. But if you're the first person to walk on the moon, you'll always be the first person to walk on the moon. And people will always know Neil Armstrong. But they won't know who the third person was. Who was the last person to walk on the moon? I couldn't tell you. But you know who the first is. So if you're going to go for a record, try and be the first, because you'll always hold that record.
Braving freezing temperatures and extreme conditions takes serious motivation. In Nab's case, bragging rights were a powerful incentive.
So it's not the walking that I wanted to do. And I guess this is a key distinction. It's not the walking that I wanted to do. I didn't want to walk to the North Pole. I wanted to say that I'd walked to the North Pole. I wanted to be able to claim that I'd done it. So it was the goal, the achievement was what I wanted. I didn't want to actually suffer through the whole process. But of course, to achieve anything significant, you have to do something significant, because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it and they wouldn't be significant. So you have to do something very difficult or hard to achieve something special.
That's actually not the whole story. Nabs also became an adventurer with the lofty goal of trying to create a more positive image of Arabs and Muslims in the media.
Most of my life I've lived in the UK, and whenever you hear on the news the word Islamic, it's always followed by fundamentalist, Islamic terrorist, Islamic terror cell, Islamic. You never hear anything positive to do with Muslims or Arabs. So I thought, well, hopefully, if I can do this and create a lot of media buzz, then hopefully it'll be something where the media actually says something positive about Arabs or Muslims, right? First Arab not to blow something up, anything, but at least it would be something positive for once.
He didn't blow anything up, but he definitely felt firsthand the negative effects of stereotypes and racial profiling, even in 2011, 10 years after the attacks on the Twin Towers on 9/11.
I think I've been arrested or detained in every single country I've visited since 9/11. When we rode across the Atlantic, we're in a boat, and we needed to keep the boat as light as possible. So we rode across with only 5 kilograms of personal, shorts and, absolute bare minimum. So when we got to the other side, I had like 7, 8, 9 weeks of beard on my face. Anyway, we turned up to Barbados, having rowed, and I hadn't shaved in, several weeks, several months even. And from Barbados, I flew to the States. I was going to stay with a US, of all things, I was going to stay with a US Navy captain who was a friend of mine who lived near Washington, D.C. So I find it kind of ironic, because I arrived at the airport. He was there to pick me up, and I got detained by immigration because they were looking at my passport where I'm clean shaven, and they were looking at me with my massive beard, and they thought, these guys in TSA just thought, we've hit the jackpot. We've caught Al Qaeda. He's just walked into our laps. They detained me on possession of a suspicious beard, and they held me in this sort of holding area with about 100 people, and they kept me to the last. They processed everyone. They gave everyone, secondary screening, but they left me to last. And I'm going to add this in because I think this is also ridiculously hilarious. There was a lady sat next to me with a little kid, and I thought, that's odd. Why would, I can understand why they're detaining me. They want to allay their suspicions, allay their fears. Fine, got no problem with it. But this lady she was about, I don't know, let's say she was late 20s, early 30s with a little 5-year-old kid. So I said to her, why have you been detained? And she said, because my son's name is Pablo Escobar, or whatever it was, and he's a wanted drug dealer. And he's on this sort of list for the DEA. And I said, but didn't they notice that he was 5 years old? He can't be the drug dealer they're looking for. And she just sort of shrugged her shoulders and went, okay, fair enough. So anyway, when they finally processed everyone, I noticed that the whole room filled up with all these TSA agents. It was like a gladiator sport. They'd all come to watch the gladiator being slayed, right? And the boss came out. He sat down at the desk, set his whole computer and got everything ready. Then he called me over and I sat down and he goes, so why have you been detained? And I said, well, because I've got the beard. And why have you got the beard? Well, I just rode across the Atlantic. Would you believe I just rode across the Atlantic? And he said, no. And I pointed at my T-shirt, which I was wearing, which said www.atlanticrowing.com. And he went to his computer, typed it in, and there was a news article, thankfully, about us in the UK, about how, I was one of the first to, row across the Atlantic, et cetera, et cetera. He looked at this news article from the Daily Mail. He saw that and he went, wow, you really did. Okay, you can go now. And I was released.
That ambitious rowing expedition was Nab's second claim to fame after walking to the poles. In 2011, it took him and his team 43 days, or 7 weeks, to row 4,600 kilometers across the Atlantic, from the Canary Islands to Barbados.
Okay, so what you have to remember is there's no day, it's shifts. So we would row for 2 hours, then we'd be off for 2 hours. And in your off hours, you're so exhausted, you just climb in the cabin, you fall asleep. There's no time for anything else. So you row 2 hours, you sleep 2 hours. You row 2 hours, sleep 2 hours. And so almost there are 6 days in every day, because there's 6 times you have to wake up and start rowing. So a typical shift would be you'd get a 10-minute warning. They'd knock on the cabin and say 10-minute warning, and you sort of start to stir, 5-minute warning, and you have to start getting ready to move out of the cabin. And then change, you come out of the cabin. And when I say cabin, it's a watertight cabin with a very small 1 meter hatch. So you have to climb out the hatch and then you swap with somebody who's already rowing. And that guy who's rowing goes into the cabin. So you've also got to remember, you've got to balance the boat. So one guy comes out, one guy goes in. One guy comes out, one guy goes in. So you do this sort of ballet dance where everyone's swapping positions. And then after about 5 minutes of doing that, the whole shift has changed and you start rowing. And so you row for your 2-hour shift. During that 2-hour shift, you need to eat and drink. So one person from that shift will be designated to boil water and then cook. I say cook. Add the boiling water to the dehydrated food and mix it. So that's cooking. And then hand those out. And everyone gets 5-10 minutes to eat their food. Everyone gets a water bottle with drinking water with, Tang or whatever additive. And and that's That's it. 2 hours of rowing, and then 2 hours. So there wasn't much going on except rowing. But it sounds boring. But the great thing about our shift was we all had a very similar sense of humor. So we actually had quite a good laugh together, and it kept morale up. So it was painfully miserable rowing, but we were always laughing and having a joke together. So it was actually kind of fun. If you ask me which was the hardest expedition, by far rowing across the Atlantic is by far the hardest thing I've ever done. And walking to the North Pole is sort of number two, and a very, very distant three would be Everest. It's difficult to compare apples to apples, but then, or apples to pears, or apples to oranges. But the mathematics of it is, on Everest, on a long day, you'd do maybe 4 hours climbing. Not on a summit day. Summit day is obviously a very long day, but most days you only limit yourself to, you don't want to ascend too many meters in a day because you can acclimatize. So you don't really work in terms of time. You may do 4 hours, 6 hours walking, climbing. On the North Pole, you might do 8 to 10 hours of walking. But on the Atlantic, you're doing 12 hours rowing. So if you just take it by mathematics, would you rather do 4 hours or 12 hours?
Nabs attempted to climb Mount Everest in 2010, the year before he rowed across the ocean, but his plan to reach the top of the world's highest mountain went downhill.
What you normally do when you're climbing Everest is you go to base camp, you sort of acclimatize there for a while, and then you start climbing up and down to Camp 1, back down, Camp 2, back down. And so for variety, we were climbing a different mountain nearby called Lobuche, which is at 6,200 meters. And we were just, we were actually climbing up and down this mountain to the equivalent of Camp 2 on Everest and acclimatizing. So the first day we went up and we came straight back down. The second time we went up, we stayed one night, we came back down. And each time we would stay longer at altitude and get used to the thinner air. And the last training run, we'd stayed 2 nights up top, and it was quite bad. We were coughing quite a lot. And so it's called the Kumbu cough. You end up coughing so much that you can end up breaking your ribs from coughing. And it's to do with the altitude, and it's to do with the desiccation of the lining of your esophagus. So every time you breathe in, because it's so cold, eventually you start to dry up and kill off the lining of your windpipe, and those flakes of skin end up irritating you, and you end up coughing, and then you get infection in the lung, which makes you cough. And so we were having a terrible time on the at 6,200 meters, and that was our last training run. We were going to come down and try and recover before we were going off to Everest and actually attempting a summit. And as we were coming down, it was sort of late in the day, around 11 o'clock in the morning, and the sun was high and the ice was melting, and I was walking down and I stood on a bit of ice. It broke, I fell, and I didn't fall far, but actually what happened was I fell. It's as if I was on a step. So step isn't particularly high, but if you roll your ankle and you fall, that distance of, I don't know, half a foot fall, 12 inches, you fall and you land on your ankle the wrong way, you break your ankle. But what happened was I didn't just break my ankle, I broke my left one way, and then that ice broke, and then I fell on my right ankle and broke it one way, and then the ice broke and I fell again and landed on my ankle the other way. So I broke my right ankle twice, both ways, left ways and right ways, and I broke my left ankle as well. So I sort of did it 3 ways, And then so that was the end of Everest for me. No more walking.
He planned on returning to Everest the following season, but his injury was worse than he thought.
I knew it was done for that year, at least for that climbing season. And I was disappointed because I'd been working towards it for, I told you about every morning training, I would run up 100 flights of stairs. So I was actually not kidding when I was talking about 100 flights of stairs. The building I lived in was a 10-story building. I'd run up to the 10th floor, take the lift down, run up 10 floors, take the lift down, run up 10 floors, take the lift down. Every morning I'd run up 100 flights of stairs. So I was doing that every day. I was doing so much stuff to get ready for Everest. And then everything was snatched away in a moment. And then after a while I thought, well, setback, I'll just have to recover and try again next year. But what I didn't know was that both ankles were broken so badly that I couldn't walk. And so I had, 20, something, I can't remember, I don't know how many procedures on my ankles to try and fix them. And I had stem cell treatment. I had artificial synovial fluid injected into my ankles. I had operations, keyhole surgery to remove bits of bone, and just nothing seemed to work. And so I was stuck for 3 months in bed, and then I was stuck for 2 years not being able to walk for more than 2 minutes. And actually the whole process is very depressing. So going from super active to being bedridden is one thing, and then being in constant pain is another. But then I went to America and had stem cell treatment. And 4 weeks after the stem cell treatment, I was able to walk for about 10 hours. So the stem cell treatment made a massive difference in my ability to, my sort of mobility, but also the pain. It reduced the pain to almost zero.
Ultimately, his achievements and story didn't make many headlines in the Western media, and his plan to reshape the Arab narrative didn't quite come to fruition. But he became quite the hero in his native country, especially while he was in the poll, where he scored a major point for all Arabs on behalf of Oman.
In Oman, where I'm originally from, it was blanket coverage. I had full coverage every day in the Arabic newspapers and the English newspapers every single day. And on the radio FM station, every morning during drive time, there was a radio update. So I'd be calling from a satellite phone. I'd do a short interview. They would edit it and they would play it on during rush hour. So every morning during rush hour, all the kids and the parents and the workers going to work would hear me at the North Pole saying, polar bears tried to eat me. So when I came back, I just thought everything, nothing had really changed for me. But I turned up in Oman and it was crazy. There was hundreds of people at the airport. Everywhere I went, people would recognize me, and then I'd be getting asked to go to schools. But I would go to the schools and the kids would love it. And I'd show them pictures and answer questions. And, I couldn't do enough school visits at the time.
Oman is a small country with a population of just over 5 million. The country shares land borders with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen.
Oman is described as the Switzerland of the Middle East. So, as an example, people talk about all the unrest in the Middle East. And, we're bordered by Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Iran, like hotbeds of unrest. And yet you never hear about Oman in the press. I think Oman is the only country to not have had a terrorist incident this century. It's a very, very stable and quiet and secure country. So when I say it's the Switzerland of the Middle East, you'll never have heard of Oman, but these are some of the reasons. The other thing about Oman that everyone says is Oman is a friend to everyone. So, for example, when the Americans needed to get their hostages back, not hostages, but the American citizens back from Iran, it was Oman that was the intermediary. See, Oman has open relations with every country, I think. And I guess the other thing is people say about Oman is that they are very friendly. A couple of years ago, there was a Spartan race in Oman. It was the first Spartan race in Oman. And Spartan, I guess you must have heard of Spartan races. They contacted me and asked me to be one of the ambassadors for the race. And I said, I'd love to, but, I'm in no physical shape to do it anymore because of my ankles, and I'm now fit and fat and old and whatever. And they gave me a personal trainer for, 2 months beforehand, every morning getting me ready for this event. Anyway, just before the event, the trainer and I, we went out to this Spartan race location, and we went over the obstacles so that I was ready for the actual race. So I wasn't expecting to win or whatever. I was just expecting to inspire everyone by my presence and, lead the way and show people that, Nabs is doing it. So as we were going through it, on the way back, my car engine radiator blew up and we broke down by the side of the road. And we couldn't drive the car. We were stuck in the middle of nowhere. And this location was the other side of the mountain range. So we were stuck completely on the wrong side of town from all the garages and everything. We was just in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, this car passes by, stops, and this Omani guy comes out. And he just says, to be honest, I was so irritable at that time. He comes out and he goes, "Hi, is there something wrong with your car?" And I was about to snap back at him, go, just say something really sarcastic, like, why the hell do you think we stopped? It's not because the car's working, is it? Anyway, I looked at this guy and he looked like he had a nice face and he was trying to be helpful. And I just sort of bit my tongue and tried to curb my frustration. And I just said, the car's broken down and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, to cut a longer story slightly shorter, this guy basically said, "Here, take my car." And he gave me the keys and he said, "I will fix it. Come back tomorrow." And I was like, "Oh, I can't take your car. That's ridiculous. I don't even know you." And he was like, No, take my car. Just it's okay. And then he kept on insisting. And after a while, I said to the guy, "You don't even know my name. You don't have my phone number. You don't have, I could run away with your car. You have no idea who I am." He says, "It's not a problem. I'm sure you'll come back tomorrow." So anyway, so the next day was actually the day of the race. So I came back the next day and I was trying to call him and he wasn't picking up. And I had his car and I was feeling so embarrassed because I had this guy's car and now I had my car. It had been fixed. So I had two cars and this guy didn't have his car. And I was calling him and I was like, God, I'm going to have to leave. He's going to think I stole his car. Anyway, it turned out he'd been at the mosque praying. And eventually he came out, answered my phone call. We went round to his house. We had lunch with him. And every time now he comes to town, he'll give me a ring and we'll go for lunch. The initial thing is so crazy. Random stranger just comes up and gives you his car. That would never happen in England. I suppose that's an extreme example, but I think that's basically what Oman used to be like. And I think, with civilization, with, the way things have been going in Oman, we're losing that a bit. But in general, the guys here, the people here are just ridiculously friendly. They're so friendly, it's freaky. It's like people think there must be an ulterior motive,
Nabs is now a consultant who travels around the world to places like South Africa, doing what he calls troubleshooting for companies looking to grow. His extreme adventuring days are mostly behind him, but the mindset is still on.
If you aren't singularly focused on achieving it, you probably won't even start. And that applies to everything. I guess even to maybe like even marriage, There's so many things that could apply to. If you're not really focused on making it succeed, then it won't. If you don't have an overall vision or goal that you want to achieve, that's a burning goal, you will quit. Because there's absolutely, look, even if I said to you, I'll give you £1 million to row across the Atlantic, you'll do about most people will do about 3 hours or 3 shifts of rowing before they give up, because there's absolutely no way that that's worth £1 million. You can't, money is not going to do it for you. External motivations is not going to do it for you. I think if you have constant doubts about wanting to give up, you will end up giving up, because there's too much internal discord in your in your mind. You're fighting constantly between, I want to do this, I want to give up, I want to do this, I want to give up. Eventually, I want to give up. Yeah, I'm going to give up. Eventually, you're going to say, I want to give up. So you have to be 100% focused. And to do that, before I went, this Navy SEAL told me this bit of advice. It's not enough to have one burning goal. Sometimes you need carrots and sticks, and you need lots of them lined up. And what he means by that is, I need to think about, I want to be the first Arab. I want to be at the North Pole in my traditional outfit and have a photograph of me standing at the North Pole. I want to come home as a success. So you have all these carrots, and each step you're taking, which will be the hardest step you've ever taken in your life, you need another reason to keep going. But there also has to be sticks sometimes. If I give up, I will not raise any money for charity. If I give up, all those kids will be disappointed. If I give up, people will laugh at me. If I give up, and you're thinking, I am never going to give up, because if I give up, people will laugh at me. So you need lots of reasons, because that nagging voice in the back of your head saying, this is too bloody hard, I want to give up, eventually is going to overwhelm you, and you will give up.
Good advice. To know more about Nabs Al Busaidi, follow him on Instagram at Arab Adventurer, or go to arabadventurer.com. That's also where you can buy his book. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like it and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at @NadiaMichelle_. See you soon.